Aloha, and welcome to another edition of A Better Day. I'm State Senator Sam Slom, the Senate Minority Leader, and for the next half hour, we hope you'll stay with us because we'll have an interesting and hopefully informative program with a very special guest a little bit later on. But a lot of things have happened. Now we're in April, the final full month of this year's state legislative session. We're scheduled to end May 1st, and this will be the month where we have a lot of things happening. In just a day or two, we're going to have the second crossover where the Senate will vote on and send back to the House bills, and the House will do the same with the Senate bills. And then after that, in the last 2 weeks of the month, we'll go into conference committee. For those bills that have been amended or modified or changed and we haven't reached agreement, we go into conference committee and see if we can hammer out a version that will pass both houses and then go to the governor for his signature. So a lot of things happening. You still have an opportunity to get involved here, to make your presence known, to talk to your legislator or talk to people on various committees. Let them know how you stand. I know a lot of people still get very frustrated and they think that there's nothing they can do, but you can. And your presence here is very valuable. So see what you can do. You can call my office at any time. You can call any legislative office and say, hey, I'm paying for you. I want some service and I want some information. Well, a lot of things have happened. As I said, we're right now in the home stretch. We've completed 2/3 of the 60 working day legislative session. And the big elephant in the room, or gorilla, depending on your choice of animals, is the supplemental budget. And what's happened since we last met is this. You may recall that the governor had announced in February that he had secured a nearly $900 million budget surplus that was available at the end of the fiscal year in June of 2013. I questioned whether or not we really had a surplus, in fact saying that we didn't have a surplus, and that even if we did, say if there was a paper surplus on June 2013, the governor had many bills which had appropriations attached to them that the legislature had voted on. He had not released those funds. So even if there was a real surplus, then that would have been reduced by those funds and those bills. However, last month in March, mid-month, we had the quarterly meeting of the Council on State Revenues. And it's important because in our Constitution, the House and the Senate must pattern their budget estimates and expenditure patterns around what the estimates and projections are for the council revenues. Well, it was kind of a blockbuster for some people, not for your Senate minority, but for some people, because the previous projection had shown revenues expanding at a rate of about 3.3% for the current fiscal year, which is 2014, it ends in June, and a 7% increase the next year, 15. Well, what did the council do? The council backed off on its projections, reduced its 3.3% estimate for this fiscal year to zero, no revenue growth, and down to 5% next year, 2015. Well, what that did was set off a chain reaction because in our state constitution, we, unlike the federal government, must have a balanced budget. And that meant that the balance or the budget sent over by the House, by the governor, and waiting in the Senate was in fact not balanced. So we've had several more meetings. We had weekend meetings, and we've discussed cutting the budget. Now you got to be careful when you hear legislators talk about cutting the budget, because what they're really talking about is not cutting the base budget in most cases. They're cutting the increases that either the governor or departments have suggested or nonprofits have come for or anything else. And that's what they cut first, the projected increases. So even though we have to cut the budget in order to withstand a potential $1 billion shortfall, it's mostly cutting increases that were projected and estimated, not the base budget. But you'll still hear people whining and wailing and crying, you cut my budget, you cut it to the bone. Not true. We still have a tremendous amount of expenditures, spending, and debt. So we'll be talking about that, and that really is the focus of this legislative session, that 2-year budget, supplemental budget. But in the meantime, you know we've gotten involved in things like marijuana, which I predicted a couple months ago was not going to be decriminalized or legalized this session, despite all of the hoopla and excitement about it. Physician-assisted suicide didn't go anywhere. Gambling, you'll just have to continue gambling at home or your church or your favorite bar. That's not going to be passed or changed this year because it is, after all, an election year. And by the way, candidates are lining up. They're pulling papers, but many of them have not filed yet. So it's still interesting until June or July when the rubber meets the road. But going to be a lot of races, hopefully contested races, so that you have choices, regardless of whether you're a Republican or Democrat or independent. Anyway, we've had a lot of other things happen here at the Capitol. We have talked about the Health Connector, and March 31st was the deadline for people to sign up for the Health Connector exchange here. Obamacare. Look, it's a failure nationally, it's a failure locally. Initially, the estimates were that we were going to get about 100,000 people signed up. Well, we didn't get the final figures yet, but it probably is in the range of 6,000 to 7,000 people. And we're not even sure how many of those are actually paid premium holders. What we do know is the president misspoke, or lied if you prefer, when he said you can keep your existing plan. Wrong, and many of you got cancellation notices about that. That you can keep your present doctor. Wrong, you couldn't. And 3, that your premiums would go down. Wrong. In almost every case, your premiums went up. But the Hawaii Health Connector, which got a $204 million grant from the federal government, couldn't get its act together, couldn't get its website together, even though it had hired the same failed contractor as the federal government, the Canadian company, CGI, spent over $53 million of that $204 million, hired an army of people to twist your arm and tell you, you should sign up for this, spent a lot of money on advertising and other sources. In fact, we're still trying to get the breakdown on how your money was spent. Couldn't get it from the state level, so I've filed a complaint with the GAO, the Government Accounting Office, the arm of the federal government that looks into any federal expenditures or grants. Maybe they will get to the bottom of it. But the bottom line for you, it affects you, it impacts you. And in that law that was passed a couple of years ago, and you may recall I was the only one that voted against it, the only one in the whole legislature. In that law, it said if the connector does not get the adequate federal funding, then guess what? We tax you. We have a 2 or 3% premium tax on everyone, whether you wanted the the Health Connector or not, whether you wanted Obamacare or not, you're going to get stuck with that penalty. And there still is a provision, still live, it's on life support, to have the state government take over the Health Connector. Well, we've done such a wonderful job with roads and with transportation and with education. Why not health care too? Look, we had a good system under the Prepaid Health Care Act, which had been in effect since 1974. It was cutting edge for the rest of the nation. Employers paid the freight, but it worked. And it didn't have as much bureaucracy as we've got right now. So we're going to have to see and wait and see how that goes on. Well, I mentioned neither marijuana or suicide or gambling had passed muster this session, but we had really knockdown, drag-out debates in trying to choose a state microbe. That's right, you heard me right. We have a state everything else, fish, rock, tree, flower. We wanted a state microbe. The only problem was the House came up with their own microbe, and the Senate came up with a new one, and you ought to have seen, you should have been here. Well, you should be here to hear some of these debates, but you should have been here to hear the academics argue over the microbes. And if that wasn't enough, then we're arguing and still arguing over a state instrument. And the odds-on favorite is the ukulele, but you know that the ukulele we borrowed from the Portuguese. So there were also entries like the Hawaiian steel guitar, the ohe or the nose flute, and other entries as well. So what the Senate has decided to do is let the school children vote. Let them pick it, as they picked the state fish many years previously. Well, we'll see. You know, we get divided in things like this, and we go in different directions. There was a lot of excitement about OHA and the development of the lands that they got from the state in Kakako and building high-rise buildings, some of which were projected to be 650 feet high. Right now, there are plans for as many as 37 high-rise buildings in and around Kakako, the Kapiolani corridor, the so-called Kakakomauka and Makai. And it's still a big debate as to whether or not we will protect the last existing waterfront in urban Honolulu. Well, these are things that you can get involved with, and you should get involved with. So again, don't give up. Unfortunately, all of my bills to empower citizens more, initiative, referendum, recall, term limits, none of them passed first crossover this year, but we won't give up. And remember that at election time. If these issues are important to you, ask candidates that knock on your door or town meetings you go to, and when you vote for people that are not going to raise your taxes or increase your government or spending or anything like that. Remember, it's easy to sit back here in the big square building and vote for bills that expend your money, because we don't have any money in the state. It's all up to you. Well, that's just my synopsis of what's going on. As always, you can always call me personally. You can come or call my office. We'll give you any kind of help that you want, preparing testimony or information about hearings. Jones Act. When I say Jones Act, what does that mean to you? Do you know anything about it at all? Does it have an impact on your life? Well, as a matter of fact, it does. And for a matter of fact, for 20 years now or more, people have been talking about the Jones Act, but just recently it's gotten more traction than before. And a guy that is probably the preeminent expert on the Jones Act and its impact on Hawaii and other jurisdictions is with us today, and he's going to share his knowledge and perspective with us. And it's Mike Hansen. And Mike is the head of the Hawaii Shippers Council. He's been a fixture in columns in local media and on radio and television, and we're glad to have him with us today. And Mike, welcome to A Better Day.
Thank you, Sam.
And by the way, you even asked me, why we call it A Better Day, and I tell everybody every month. The governor says his whole thing is a new day. Well, every time you wake up, if you're lucky enough to wake up, it's a new day. I think we deserve a better day, right? Particularly the taxpayers and consumers of this state.
That's a good approach, yeah.
Yeah. So, look, you're the head of the Hawaii Shippers Council. Why don't you give us a brief on the Shippers Council and a brief on Mike Hansen 101?
Sure. The Hawaii Shippers Council was formed back in the 1990s.
Way back when?
When a previous Jones Act reform initiative was undertaken by a guy by the name of Rob Cortell and the Jones Act Reform Coalition. And it's essentially an industry trade association of those people who are cargo owners and ship their merchandise on the ocean carriers that operate between the West Coast and Hawaii. Mm-hmm. And our interest is in getting better service at lower prices, which will ultimately mean that goods land in Hawaii at a less cost and they benefit the consumer.
Mm-hmm. Who's in this council? Is it like agriculture people, or?
We've got some manufacturing businesses and some agricultural interests. Probably the most prominent are the cattlemen. Mm-hmm. They pretty much led the charge the last time around because they were interested in being able to move their live animals from Hawaii, primarily the Big Island, mm-hmm. to the West Coast.
Yeah. And what's your background? What have you been involved with?
I've been involved with shipping since I got out of university in the early 70s. And I've been involved in a number of areas of shipping, including ship agency, ship operation, vessel maintenance, and a wide variety of things.
Mm-hmm. And we are still dependent on shipping for goods in Hawaii.
Yeah, the state of Hawaii did a study in the 1990s again that found that about 80% of what we consume here is imported, mm-hmm. and about 98% arrives by sea. So ocean transportation is a major factor in the goods that we receive.
Do you think that those figures have changed very much since the
I suspect 90s? That the percentage of consumables that is imported has probably increased. For example, we're no longer manufacturing cement here. Mm-hmm. We're importing rock aggregate. Mm-hmm. So those things probably have changed.
So all these panels that we have in legislation for sustainability, we're actually less sustainable now than we were 10, 20 years ago.
Sure. And that goes for renewable energy as well. At one time, the sugar plantations provided a certain percentage, I think it was about 15% of the state's electricity from the burning of bagasse, which is the waste material of sugarcane. So all these things, yes, were less sustainable than we were before.
Yeah. Okay, we've talked about Jones Act before, but for people that this may be their their first venture, how can you sum it up in a few words? What is the Jones Act?
The Jones Act is Section 27 of the Merchant Marine Act of 1920, and it requires that any merchandise that is going to be carried on water must be done so in a vessel that is U.S. owned, U.S. flag, U.S. built, and U.S. crewed and U.S. managed. So there's approximately 38,000 ships over 1,000 gross tons in the world fleet.
38,000.
38,000. We have approximately 90, in fact, we have exactly 90 such ships in the Jones Act fleet. So there's not a shortage of ships in the world. There's a shortage of ships in the Jones Act fleet that are qualified to carry cargo from one U.S. port to another.
And what's been the recent history of American shipbuilding?
American shipbuilding has declined substantially over the past 30 or 40 years. We're building on average about 2 large ocean-going ships, commercial ships, per year in the United States. And the cost of those ships built in the United States is now 5 times, it's well documented to be 5 times what it costs to build a comparable ship in South Korea or Japan. And this is a heavy capital cost for what are known as the non-contiguous jurisdictions, that is Alaska, Guam, Hawaii, and Puerto Rico, to be carrying, because that capital cost has to be amortized over the life of the ship, and there's only one group of people that pays that, and that's the consumers in these various non-contiguous jurisdictions.
Now, what is your group and you personally, what have you been trying to get changed over the years?
Yeah, the effort in the 1990s had a different goal than we have today.
Okay.
Our goal today is to have the non-contiguous trades, that is Alaska, Guam, Hawaii, and Puerto Rico, exempted from the U.S. build requirement, meaning that...
So not from the act itself, but the portion in there that talks about American build ships.
Exactly.
Okay.
The operating cost of a U.S. flag ship is about 50% greater than a foreign flag ship. The difference is not, it's great, but it's not that great. But the capital cost of these ships is 5 times as much. That's that's the really big number in the equation. And so we believe that the non-contiguous jurisdictions, which do not have the alternatives of road truck or railroad or pipeline transport, should be given this exemption so that we can lower the cost of shipping and make more ships available.
Well, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, we have an artificial shortage of ships.
Yeah.
And that can be easily corrected by giving us that exemption.
But the people that argue against any changes in the Jones Act say, look, we need it because of defense and security of the United States. And we need it because of the safety and different requirements that American ships utilize compared to foreign ships. How do you answer those two?
Okay, the safety issue is a fairly easy one. According to the international underwriters, marine underwriters, their statistics clearly show that the older the vessel is, the greater the risk of accidents.
And on average, how old are our American vessels?
The common carrier fleet, that's the container ships that are operating in the non-contiguous trades. The average age of a ship in that particular fleet is approaching 40 years of age.
Oh, okay.
And in the world today, the average age of the international container ship fleet is 12 years. Most of these ships are scrapped by the time that they're 20 or 21 years of age.
But we hold on to them.
Yes.
Like our cars.
Because they're so expensive to replace.
That was the capital investment you were talking about a few minutes ago.
So because of the price of replacing them is so extraordinarily high, that the shipping companies will then tend to operate these ships for as long as possible. And over time, of course, the older they get, the more they cost to operate and maintain.
What about the security issue that's raised?
The national security issue?
Yes.
You've got three components there. You've got the what's known as the sea lift capacity, the shipbuilding industrial base, and then the seaman supported. In the first instance, where you've got sea lift capacity, this is where the military has the capacity to move materiel to overseas contingencies. Now, there's very few, if any, Jones Act ships that are actually involved in that activity. There's a separate fleet of ships known as the U.S. Flag International Trade Fleet, which are foreign-built U.S. flag, and about half are foreign-owned through a U.S. owning company. And they're the ones that provide a majority of the sea lift.
I see.
So this is, the Jones Act is not really contributing to sea lift. The second one is the shipbuilding industrial base. Because we're building the idea there is that by having a commercial component to major shipbuilding in the United States, that this will provide the capacity for the Navy to order ships.
Okay.
And what the problem is that we build so few large commercial ships in the United States, approximately two a year since the early 90s, that this is not really true either. In fact, there's been at least two military college studies that have suggested it might be more efficient for the U.S. to drop the U.S. build requirement for large ocean-going ships and allow the commercial operators to purchase them from foreign shipyards, and have the military concentrate its efforts on making the remaining yards more efficient.
Well, look, we're not going to have to worry about that because the Obama administration is downsizing the military, and basically they're just going to be running Meals on Wheels, right?
Right. And
so we don't need the ships.
Right. And the problem for the military is that they're also experiencing this extraordinarily high cost of shipbuilding.
Yeah.
And as the cost of each ship goes up, that means they can build fewer ships.
Got it. And the third part?
Was the crew.
Yeah.
By having a large Jones Act fleet, this means that we have a ready supply of crew in the event of a national emergency.
Yeah.
And
so, bottom line, why should Hawaii residents be concerned about this, and what kind of impact is there?
We've calculated in the past, these are old numbers, but we were looking at that the Jones Act probably costs the economy here about 3% of gross state product. And that works out to be about $3,000 per year per family.
$3,000 per year per family. And with the price of food and other things going up, we can expect that to go up as well.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Last month you participated in something unique from the Senate here. We had the first video tele-press conference, and we were hooked up with Alaska and Puerto Rico, and we tried Guam. We had a few technical difficulties. But it was a very interesting program because we had elected representatives, bipartisan, Republican, Democrat, Independent. And I think the bottom line was, and you were very active in that and very helpful, but the bottom line is it's something that we're going to continue together, the four areas, to lobby the U.S. Congress to try to get relief. But, you know, looking at lobbying, looking at the power of the American maritime industry, their proclivity to give large political donations, particularly to our delegation and governor and all of that. What do you think realistically are the chances for reform this year or when? I
think the problem that the maritime industry, the Jones Act maritime industry is facing is that the cost of major ship construction is escalating to the point where it's no longer a really viable operation. And that at some point there's going to be the straw that breaks the camel's back in that regards.
And because, as you mentioned, it's a different thrust this time as opposed to years before, just that build requirement. Not an exemption from the act, not abolition of the act or anything else.
And not affecting what happens in the coastal trades.
Yeah.
Along the mainland's coast. We're just talking the non-contiguous trades.
And we seem to have the support from Alaska and
Oh,
Puerto
absolutely.
Rico and,
yeah,
and
yeah.
Guam.
In fact, Puerto Rico is far ahead of Hawaii in terms of that. Their delegate to Congress, Pedro Perlusi, actually introduced this same kind of exemption last year in the U.S. Congress just for Puerto Rico.
And if we succeed, we can send all the coqui frogs back to Puerto Rico where they belong, right? Mike, I think you've illuminated a lot of the issues and the problems and all. If people want to get in touch with you or the Hawaii Shippers Council, how can they do so?
They can contact me at the email address. It's pacmar, P-A-C-M-A-R, @hawaiiantel.net.
And you've always been available to talk to groups or to debate the issues or whatever. And we find that this issue usually is not debatable, though. We usually don't have the maritime industry sitting down at a table like this, right? That's a shame.
In the 1990s, they did come to the table
Yeah.
to debate, but they have not recently.
Yeah. Well, as you say, probably what's going to happen is economics is going to catch up with them. The cost of shipbuilding and I mean, you're talking about 90 ships versus 38,000. I mean, that's like looking at our unfunded liability. We're not going to knock that down. Our guest has been Mike Hansen of the Hawaii Shippers Council. We've been talking about the Jones Act. If you have any more questions, you can contact me or contact Mike, and we look forward to your participation in the rest of the legislative session. Thank you very much for joining us, and you have a better day. Aloha.